Derecho de la salud versus derecho de marcas. El delicado balance a la limitación de un derecho constitucional en aras de un supuesto interés público. Armando Arenas, Olivares, México. Luis Guinard, Guinard y Noriega, Panamá. Gerardo Flores, Felipe Prieto Carrizosa Ferrero du Uría, Colombia. Moderador, Víctor Avente, Avente Stuart Abogados, Paraguay.
Buenas tardes a todos. Acá estamos dando inicio.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll now start this workshop. We are very happy because this will give us the opportunity of holding this workshop, which we think is most interesting. This is an extremely current topic, and thanks to the collaboration of the prestigious lawyers who will be with us today. I would now like to start with this workshop on health law versus trademark law. First of all, we will be listening to Gerardo Flores, whom I would like to give the floor right away to. And please feel free to ask any questions so that we can have an interesting debate and draw conclusions at the end of the workshop. Thank you. Gerardo, you have the floor. Thank you, Victor. I will now share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Good afternoon. I would like to start thanking the board, Armando, the chairman of the committee, and particularly all of you for participating in this panel. We wanted to share with you maybe a different standpoint of what we have been listening to on this topic, and without Now, what is the relation of this with the topic we have at hand today? And this is because non-communicable diseases and obesity are also epidemics. In fact, these are elements that are attacking society every day. Globally, the mortality is 2.8 million people at least every year. And for 2016, it was 1.9 million adults affected by overweight and 650 million people who have obesity. So this leads to the question whether should the governments intervene? What is the role the government should play? And if we saw that in the case of COVID, a substantial reaction was required, why should this not also be the case for a situation such as that, a condition such as that of obesity? So this leads to the need of the governments participating to tackle a highly relevant topic for the global society, namely these non-communicable diseases, such as obesity, and how this affects society. Now, simply to stop on this and start to give a look at what the global organizations have made to tackle all these issues, let me say that since 2004, the World Health Organization launched one of its major documents on this topic, the Global Strategy for the Food Strategy and Physical Activity, followed by FAO regulations, seeking to have more policies that would enable governments to better guide the way to proceed. For example, in the case of labeling, and also this encompassed the Pan-African Health Organization tackling the issue of obesity in children and adolescents. In all cases, these are all based on studies, both technical and scientific studies, that have counted on the participation of the states. So we see that the origin of these initiatives, of these government initiatives, are based on these plans which were approved by agencies to which the governments are signatories. Particularly in the global strategy for the food regime and physical activity, this includes several topics, and this approaches several key topics that lead us to understand why the governments in all our countries are focusing on this topic. One of the striking issues is that the member states, in this case, requested participation in the food regime. They have seen that there was a need to do so. So this is something that calls our attention. The idea is to decrease premature mortality, to improve quality of life. Non-communicable diseases account for 60% of deaths and 43% of the world burden on morbidity. For 2020, 73% of all deaths and 73% of all deaths are linked to these non-communicable diseases, which are expanding. The risk factors for the generations are clearly identified, and very often these causes coexist with the proliferation of other conditions. The common denominator has always been the lack of physical activity on one hand, but very clearly also nutrition. That is the reason why campaigns and objectives behind these policies include the following. For example, in this WHO document, obesity is considered one of the major is at the focus, and there are several objectives that have to do with the measures taken by the different governments. For example, promoting health, maternal breastfeeding, and healthy eating. So not tackling obesity leads to a much higher exposure to these diseases. Improving the environment regarding nutrition and physical activity in schools, then assessment of these so that the governments can follow up and then have numbers to determine the impact, then multi-sectoral measures. It is understood that not only the governments have this burden, but it is also important that the different segments of the population, whether private businesses or consumers and so on, can also participate in all these measures. And very specifically, what we will focus on more and more, implementation of fiscal policies and regulation of publicity. And this is one of the paths to tackle this major problem that can contribute to reducing the alarming numbers. Now, we have to be clear as to the fact that this is one of the top priorities of the governments. Chronic non-communicable diseases are the main leading cause of death throughout the world. 11 million deaths occurred in 2017, 22% were adults. The leading cause of death was cardiovascular diseases related to diet, a very high percentage. In 2017, the number of deaths due to the intake of sodium, of salt, is higher than the desirable levels. A low consumption of fruit and whole grain, and an improvement in the diet becomes one of the major objectives of these policies. So where does this problem stem from? Why is this occurring? Why do numbers show such a marked increase? Why do they apparently are so difficult, show that it is so difficult to tackle these non-communicable diseases? Well, first of all, the increase in processed products and foods that is consumed. Secondly, a substantial increase in the way in which publicity is carried out and the messages that are conveyed to the consumers, and particularly bearing in mind the vulnerability of people who are minors. And in addition to that, we should not say lies. Behind the role of the state, there is also a relevant economic factor, namely the increase in obesity and the increase of the deaths resulting from this. This has clearly a strong impact on healthcare costs. There are also costs, and there is also information that demonstrates that the performance at the workplace of workers who suffer from these conditions is also decreased. We therefore have to see these elements as cause for concern. There is a clear need that if we were to show statistics only, well, I could dedicate only at least 20 slides to this. But let me say that these problems are quite serious. 39% of adults aged 18 or more are overweight. 3% of the adult population in the world suffers from obesity. And this continues driving the need for governments to take steps in order to find a solution. These numbers show the increase. Mexico 2.8 in 1980 increased to 10.8 in 2008. This is something that really is cause for concern. This is reflected in numbers such as these. The two curves are rising curves. Chile, Mexico have shown a substantial increase in the total number of obesity in the past years. And this generates problems. Now, what does this lead to? What are the objectives behind the intervention of the governments? One is to improve the consumption habits. This is one of the major objectives for the medium term, to protect public health, to reduce mortality and mobility of the non-communicable and chronic non-communicable diseases, and to ensure the quantity and quality of the information. So these are the objectives laid out by governments to tackle such a relevant topic. And we start to see how labeling and publicity have a major role. They play a major role because this is one of the main tools or vehicles to convey information. This is the way in which manufacturers communicate with consumers. This is a way in which complete, comprehensive information can be provided. This should be reliable and verifiable information. Studies have been carried out by different organizations that have the objective of showing how understandable this information is for the average consumers. How do they really understand the nutritional value of the food and the risks that these might imply? And one of the studies of the WHO deals with this topic. This is a survey conducted in Colombia. The purpose was to determine how consumers selected the products they consume. And it was surprising to see how price is 60% of a factor of that determines to 60% how they select a product. Only 38% of the decision was influenced by the nutritional value of the food they were purchasing. And then including the expiry date of the food. And these percentages related to nutritional information has to become more relevant. So far, these are factors that are cause for concern and are indicating that governments should take action when they read the labels. They look at 60% pays attention to the calories, 70% to vitamins and minerals, 60% to saturated fat, and 49% to carbohydrates. But overall, they say they read these, but they don't really understand the information. And this is a small print, and if people are short-sighted, they cannot read this. They eat it, but they don't really notice what they have eaten. They don't know what they are really consuming. They cannot distinguish which is convenient or not for them. This is something we read from Barranquilla. People are sort of lazy. They don't really feel like reading this, or the print is too small. I think this should be a clearer law so that common people can make decisions as to what they purchase or not. So this has to assist the purchaser in making their decision. On the right, we have examples of the nutritional tables. And those of us who work in this profession might understand this, but there is no doubt as to the fact that this is an experience that is totally different for consumers who are in the supermarket trying to decide what to purchase. That is why, in view of the different strategies that the governments can implement, it was decided that one of the fields of action should be improving the labeling of food, and also how this affects publicity. As we shall see later, they have implemented different mechanisms. These go from voluntary or mandatory schemes, or a list of nutrients, risks, and benefits of the products, logos containing information. For example, these might have to do with the negative and positive effects. Then the lights, red, yellow, and green, ranking, the use of disclaimers, high in, low in, light, or different claims regarding the features of a given product and how this might affect health, as well as more invasive things regarding restrictions in terms of publicity. In some countries, this even includes publicity for people aged 14 or less. So the purpose of all this is to provide more information and allow consumers to make more decisions so that this can eventually lead to improving their consumption habits and therefore to a reduction as a result of consuming these foods. There are some examples from Australia and in Europe. These all have been implemented for a number of years already. In Australia, we have the Nutri-Score or the Health Star rating that can allow to identify the quality of the food. In Europe, also, for example, France has Nutri-Score and UK has a nutritional lights, traffic lights. So these are mechanisms that have been implemented. In Chile in 2016, one of the major laws was enacted, which is one of the most important ones in the region. This is labeling, for example, high in sugars, or restricting publicity of foods, particularly for those addressed to children aged below 14, incorporating messages that promote healthy lifestyles and contribute to develop healthy food eating habits. And in Chile and in Peru too. This is a case of Peru. For example, high in sodium, high in sugar since 2018. And this has a very specific feature.
They tell you what you should not do. And when you start reading it, the different instructions are quite strong to motivate people to eat adequately. They should not really take advantage of minors when interpreting these labels. We generate expectations as to what it makes you feel if you consume certain products, how they refer to your weight, for example. and they should not represent social stereotypes. This is offering other alternatives in terms of what you should be eating, and avoid dangerous positions in the large scope. Colombia, on the other hand, is a little behind compared to the other countries I have mentioned. There are several resolutions that regulate this field without going into a regulation of labeling in the way it's being done by other legislations. But there is a bill of law, and there are some legislative initiatives that are currently moving in this direction. They have not yet been approved, and this includes a warning seal. This is one of the modalities that I have mentioned in the case of other countries. In addition, they show that this is where they're moving to. This is where all governments are heading to, and in order to harmonize this type of policy. I'm showing you some of the mechanisms that are currently being used by different countries in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Scandinavian countries. Then we have the Netherlands, Belgium, Poland, Singapore. Some are compulsory, some are not. And this is one of the main controversial issues. Because what you see coming out of this is self-regulation versus interventionism. How far can we go? Can we prohibit per se, or should we invite people to a healthier life? In all cases, we try to provide tools to the consumer so that he or she may make intelligent decisions that are well informed on the basis of information that was not compulsory before, but it's becoming more and more essential. We've seen that some countries have companies that play their roles in a much more open way, even though this may affect the costs or the profit. There are companies in France or the UK where companies see that this type of seal generates another element that helps advertise their products. And if you apply it in such a way, it will persuade consumers when choosing the products he or she needs. This is a long list which shows that this is a reality today. And some are very recent. The first ones include results up to the year 2008, 2016. Brazil, Mexico, and there is a need on the part of governments to start regulating. Now, before we move to Armando and his presentation in the case of Mexico, decision-making by the consumer is our main concern. We have identified clear issues vis-a-vis the symmetry of information. The consumer is not getting all the information he needs to make a right decision. Manufacturers present whatever is convenient to them, but that's not convenient to the consumer. And we should really try to eliminate those market asymmetries and include clear, visible information to replace this lack of information in terms of nutrition or quality of the food, to back all the information appearing on the labels. Because once again, overweight premature death, lack of productivity are the consequence of this prevalence of non-communicable diseases, and also the mortality they cause, which is the clear consequence of this lack of information. And the fact that we have a high consumption of processed foodstuffs, which generates like a vicious circle and moves this increase of problems. There are several questions that we would like to leave as food for thought. Intervention versus self-regulation. What is the role of the consumer? Should the state be paternalistic? What are the alternative measures that could minimize the percentage of deaths? And these are not necessarily the restrictions that we see today. What would happen if governments do not intervene? How can we measure in order to show that these regulations work? These are just a few questions. And with the participation of Armando and Luis, we will be able to work together on the best answer to this problem. Thank you. Thank you, Gerardo. Excellent presentation, very clear, many pictures, statistics, and graphs to help us understand the situation. We'll now give the floor to Armando Arenas. And Armando, you have the floor. Armando, are you there? It seems that Armando is not connected. Let's give him a few minutes. Or maybe the organizers can help me with this technical issue. They tell me that we'll be back in a few minutes.
El hilo de la conversación está conectado con Armando primero. Si les puedo dar un minuto de accidente, tener que darles.
Coincido con Gerardo, creo que tiene que ser Armando ahora. Gracias, Luis. justo en el momento. Luis, ¿me escuchás?
Escucho.
¿Querés arrancar vos? ¿Hacemos así entonces o qué te parece?
Sí, dame un segundo.
Porque
¿Estás viendo mi pantalla, no?
te estoy viendo a vos todavía, no tu pantalla.
Aquí está mi pantalla.
Ahí está, ahí está.
All right. We are ready now. Well, I apologize for this inconvenience. So we'll continue with this workshop. So I invite Luis Guinard, who's ready. Luis Guinard, you may go ahead with your presentation. Thank you, Victor. Thank you. I'm ready. Oh, Armando is here. So, I'm sorry. I'll give the floor to Armando. I apologize. Armando, go ahead. Thank you. Can you hear me? I apologize. Internet sometimes fails. Good afternoon to you all. I want to thank ASIPI for this invitation, for this opportunity to be part of the workshop. Let me greet my colleagues, Gerardo, Luis, Victor. I will talk about the Mexican experience. So I wonder if you can show my first slide. I'll talk about some background information. Gerardo already talked about the need to regulate processed foodstuffs. It is important. We all want to have quality foodstuffs. We need clear, accurate, truthful information to make informed decisions when buying and have a capacity to choose products. No one is against that. This is what we should all look for. This is the expectation. However, my message is that in the Mexican system, we are not providing the best example. The objective is very good, but in my opinion, the system has some flaws that we should try to improve. And this is where we're heading to. We want to have a better health system that allows us to make good decisions. Next slide. No, the next one before, I'm sorry. One before this one. It skipped one. Oh. No, there's one missing. Well, never mind. I will explain. I will talk about it briefly. I'll talk about the Mexican system and why, in my opinion, it's not the best. This regulation started last year. We gave an opportunity to the private initiative to express themselves so as to have a regulatory framework that was robust enough. However, we were not able to reach that objective, and our system is not good. And this standard prohibits using animation, celebrities, drawing, mascots, interactive elements that are directed to children to promote the purchase of a product. This is what the Mexican standard says. If it does not comply with the nutritional content, this product should have the necessary seals saying so. And now, why we don't take it as an example? in the last part, the standard says its application must take place according to other existing regulations, which means that if you hold an industrial property right, you would have no problem and could continue using your industrial property and your labels. This is what the standard states. In my opinion, it's very vague, because this last subparagraph is not clear enough. It means that the manufacturer will feel that he can use or exercise his rights. It's contradictory, because that's not the purpose of the standard. The purpose is not to use the product if it has more than one warning seal. So it's ambiguous, it's contradictory, and it generates a lot of confusion across manufacturers. There are many consultations in our office, and they ask us, if I have my own rights, but the standard says they should agree when applying it, I may not use it or enjoy my rights. And the answer is, it's very risky. That's not the purpose. That's not the objective. The authority wanted to give like a sweet to the manufacturers so they don't feel their rights are being vulnerated. These are the seals that our legal framework requires. And these are the drawings or the characters or the mascots that, as from April 2021, manufacturers will no longer be able to use. The standard came into force in October this year. It's been 2 months. However, this was issued in March this year. It was anti-climax because we were beginning with the pandemic, and this standard was issued and made things a lot more difficult. So now we need to adequate to this new requirement. It's like an additional burden on the manufacturers. Next. I don't know why the slide is not very in order. Something happened. The order is different. One question is, where are we heading to? I can do the projections, if you like, to see if we can improve the order. Is this the one you were looking for? In the meantime, I will explain where we are heading to with this legislation. All of us are clear that we need the accurate information to make informed decisions. However, with this type of legislation, in my opinion, we are not reaching the objective, because we inhibit innovation, we inhibit competitiveness, the freedom of expression. It inhibits manufacturers to provide consumers high-quality products. And given this situation, what may happen in a not very distant future, that's the slide. You can see there. Thank you, Gerardo. You can see that's Tonio, the tiger. You can no longer use it. We will have to change the advertising, and this will be the new packaging. It somehow inhibits competitiveness, and this is not what manufacturers are looking for. Now, all these legislations, international treaties, are contradicted in this new regulation. And the most important, which I did not mention yet, is the following. This process of creating a standard was not a legislative procedure. It was through an office in Mexico that deals with technical issues, and it did not go to Parliament. So it's not even a law. It should have gone through legislation. It cannot become a law without being treated in Parliament. So this is the order, and this contradicts this situation. So in the end, it's not a treaty affecting international trade. We have several international agreements that have to do with foreign trade, and in my opinion, there are some coincidences with my colleagues in Mexico who believe that this new regulation is an obstacle to trade, because now industrialists and manufacturers and international companies that sell their products worldwide will not be able to access the sale of their products in our country, because they will have to produce a different packaging with a different characteristic. And therefore, this will become an obstacle to do business with Mexico. Next. Now, this part is very important. What I've mentioned so far is very general. Some people may think that lawyers are exaggerating, or industry is exaggerating, or they are defending their own vested interests. But that's not the case. We are also consumers, and we are also worried about this. And this labeling wants the consumer to have clear, trustworthy information so that they can make what we call educated decisions. In my opinion, this is not always so in Mexico. The standard says it should be truthful. These are two products that we eat a lot in Mexico: the tortilla, made of maize, and then toast, maize toast. A toast is cooked with oil, and this process is more complex. They have the same amount of calories, 45 and 44.5. respectively. Now, in this case, according to our standard, the toast has a seal because it contains sodium, while the one on top does not. They have the same calories, but only one will get the seal. And this does not meet the objective of being truthful. An ordinary person that is not aware of this type of information will never know whether he or she is making the right decision. This was prepared by a chemist and an expert in nutrition. This is something that requires an analysis in depth. And next now. Here we have another example. Amaranto is very nutritious and recommended by doctors. Now, when we mix amaranto with chocolate, it adds sugar. We have amaranto from two different companies, and the difference in calories is important. It's 93. However, both would carry seals warning the content of chocolate calories. And the standard does not distinguish how far it should go before you get the seal. Here we have another clear example with cheese, regular cheese and light cheese. Law does not allow us to determine who requires 2, 3, or maybe no seal at all. So the light version has 2 grams of saturated fat, while the regular version contributes 2.8 grams of saturated fat. So if you apply the logic, the second one would require 2 seals, while the one on top, 3. But this does not allow consumers to make good decisions. Now here we have a very typical example of tortillas made of flour, and then we have dehydrated toast. The dehydrated toast have less calories and they have 2 seals, and the flour tortillas only have 1 seal because the toast includes sodium, which makes them get 2 seals. In my opinion, this is not critical nutritional fact for a young person, for example. And if this person goes to a market to buy, may find that this is not a suitable foodstuff. So labeling is simple. It provides information. This is what we give people. Yes, in my opinion, it's simple, but it does not allow the consumer to make the best decision. There will come a point that we will go to a supermarket and all products will have these seals. So the consumers, how can he make an informed decision? All products will have a seal. So what is the best decision? That does not meet the objective. It's not simple. The information is not necessary. It's not what we need. We said it should be quick. When the customer goes to the supermarket, sees the product, sees the seals, and we will relate this with the fact that it does not meet certain nutritional standards, which is correct. But if we go to the supermarket and all products have a seal, so what do? We look at the product, and in the front of the product we will find the seal, and at the back we won't be able to read the nutritional information provided. So all products have labels. We see the labels, but we need to check them. If we try to understand the nutritional facts, we won't be able to understand it. So in my opinion, this is not a quick procedure.
So the standard is very discriminatory because it is only focused on the formal trade, the formal businesses that sell the products and adjust themselves to the regulation. And in the streets, we see lots of food that is sold. There you see a child which is fat who's trying to purchase trash food, but this food contains no information at all. And look at the amount contained in the bags. This is not regulated in Mexico. Those of you who have visited my country see that we have a lot of informal businesses selling food out on the streets. So what happens with all these foods that are sold throughout the country without any control, and also at the exit of the schools? So that is why this would not be complying with the objective. Now are we on the path to over-regulation to the industry? Well, we think that is quite the case. We have the right to health and the right to promote the trademarks. So the government should try to look after people, but they should also try to assist the businesses. We have to strike a balance. And in Mexico, we are not achieving this because there is an initiative whereby the Secretary of Health will be the authority of issuing quality seals. Now, what does this mean? The authority will say this product is a good quality because it has adequate nutrition facts. They're not going to say how. And from my standpoint, this will lead to even greater confusion to the public because in addition to the warning seals and so on, and the nutritional facts, we'll have quality seals to be granted by the authorities. This will become a bottleneck. And this has to do with attempting to give the public products that are of a given quality. And from my standpoint, this is over-regulation. They say, well, this is good, this is bad, this works, this does not work. So there's a kind of imbalance. So this is tending towards over-regulation. This is not adequate and also discriminates against other types of products. And this can be like demonizing. In Mexico, 2 reforms were enacted, local laws, whereby in Oaxaca and in Tabasco, trash food is forbidden for children. So these can no longer be sold to children, and you cannot have these available in health centers or in schools. This is something that is being implemented throughout the country. And in my opinion, this is like an over-regulation. I think this is not the right path to follow. We have to strike a balance, really. We have to figure out which is the best way so that these 2 different types of laws can coexist without any discrimination against one or the other. Now, this cartoon was made by the government this year. This is a campaign against the prestige of certain types of food. According to the words, the script here, the message is sent out in the sense that the manufacturers of these products are not interested in your health. They are only interested in money. In general terms, you can see a tiger there, or a lion rather, which imitates one of the main characters in one of the products that we see in cereals. And this is like a kind of publicity showing the manufacturers of these products as the bad guys in the movies. So we really have to see how the authorities can have a good education campaign. Parents are also responsible for educating their children in the sense of which are the foodstuffs that they can purchase. But this kind of publicity does not really contribute to striking the balance between the 2 types of interest. Now, does this only affect the food and beverage industry? Well, no, it also affects celebrities. They can no longer promote these products. The sports people cannot sponsor certain types of products. There's also a reform that is being discussed regarding publicity. The publicity agencies can no longer organize campaigns to promote these types of products, because if this standard is issued, they can no longer participate in campaigns of this nature. Then the media, radios, and other platforms, printed media, will no longer be able to do this. International agencies like the Olympic Games Committee, FIA, Formula One, FIFA, and UEFA. The lawyers of industrial property will also be affected because it will no longer be possible to protect these clients. So this does affect the ecosystem in several industries. These are some of the conclusions. These were mentioned earlier on, but let me mention these once again. The most important thing is, and unfortunately we haven't been unable to materialize these, is education. Education, both at home and at school. At home, many efforts can be carried out, and at schools, education has not been too active in order to promote promoting such culture. The certification brands, such as the quality seals, these are granted by private companies. And for example, for kosher food, in this case, the branding will be a valuable aid to identify those products that comply with certain quality standards. Self-regulation of the industries, I think this is very good. Many industries comply with this. And I think that most of them would be willing to have high self-regulation standards in order to meet the requirements of this standard, in order to provide the best product possible to consumers. Reliable and useful information. This should be gradual. This is part of the education process, as consumers will be adjusting ourselves gradually in order to understand how this information works. I think this is the right path. And the nutritional traffic lights, I think, is a very good example. This is used in Ecuador and in other countries. For example, if it has a high sugar content, in a range that is not all too sophisticated to explain, we see these kinds of seals. This allows us to distinguish how much sugar, how many calories we'd be consuming. I think this could be an option. I'm not saying that this is the best option, but I think that this could be then used to improve and figure out which is the best mechanism in order to strike this balance. Next, please. So thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation, and I am happy to take any questions or comments during the discussion. Thank you. Thank you, Armando. Once again, thank you, Gerardo, for your assistance. We will now listen to Maurice. And following that, we'll have time for questions from the participants. Thank you.
A ver, un segundo. ¿Me escuchan?
Sí, sí.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you to ASIPI for having entrusted us to organize this panel. What we are trying to do here is to comply with one of the goals we have in the two committees, to have a common position. This webinar on this topic seeks to draw the attention on a topic so that we are aware of what is happening, where we are heading, and to what extent we have to collaborate in disseminating this topic and figuring out a solution that is equitable. Like Armando was saying, there has to be a proportionality between the measure that is taken and the rights that companies have on their brands, and also the rights of consumers of selecting the brand they prefer. So first of all the constitutions of our countries include the obligation of the state and the right of the population to have access to a healthcare system. we see different ways constitutions have regulated this issue. In Panama, the constitution states that it is a role of the state to take care of the health of the population of the republic. In Colombia, they speak of fundamental rights. In Peru, protecting the health, the right to protect the health. And in other constitutions, the population has a right to health. The state cannot guarantee health, but the state can have the role of doing everything possible so that the population has the best health possible, basically. Now, on the other hand, and my presentation will be more of a legal nature, at least the initial part. Here we have the trademark law. Some constitutions recognize this, the creation and intentions of laws. This is not included in the constitution, but in the awareness that trademarks are an intangible asset, the right to ownership is regulated, and all the constitutions of the democratic countries recognize the right to an asset. To all countries, you can have private property. In other countries, they guarantee private property, and many constitutions have standards in place that refer to the right of consumers to select, to choose, the right of consumers to have access to reliable and clear information. That is included in the Constitution and Panama. So including measures of this kind are not something that might be considered something that the state invented all of a sudden. But the state does have the right, the obligation to take care of the health of the population, that the information provided has to be reliable. Now, the question is it necessary to have a struggle between the right to health and the trademark law, or going beyond this, the right of health, is this above the right to property? These are questions that we have to ask ourselves. What happens with consumers' rights? What happens with this right to choose? And we speak about the right to choose. This is not only regarding nutritional information, but also to select different types of brands. And this includes design and other issues. And this is part of intellectual property or industrial property of a given manufacturer. And the question that will then lead to my conclusions is, can all these different types of rights survive together? The Mexican law, which Armando explained in detail, contains a key point which states that people, cartoons, celebrities, gifts and offers and games and so on cannot be used. Things that can promote consumption of these goods. The bill in Panama, I think, is more dangerous. It doesn't refer to labeling, but this is the way it has been drafted. This is an initiative that will be now discussed at the General Assembly. And it states the use of elements that are attractive, such as cartoons, sketches, different characters, toys, and similar objects to promote and provide publicity on any kind of food product. This basically has to do with the Mexican and Chilean legislation. The type of seal used is almost identical, but this does not restrict the use of cartoons and drawings. It states that it is banned, it is forbidden to use these drawings or characters on any food product. It's quite an invasive type of standard. So far, the main source of attack or the main source used for the purpose of counteracting or stating that this is illegal or this is wrong is quoting these ASIPI regulation, WIPO, the TRIPS agreement, sorry. And this is Article 8 of the TRIPS agreement. Members, when formulating or modifying their laws and regulations, can adopt the necessary measures to protect health, public health. So whenever we take out 20, they take out Article 8, provided these measures are compatible with the provisions of the current agreement. So we have to read the rest of the agreement. And Article 20 states it will not be unjustifiably complicated. The use of a brand will not be unjustifiably complicated or in such a way that it affects the capacity of the brand for distinguishing goods and services of a company from those of a different company. Now, the key point is unjustifiably, and this leads us to determine whether it is justified or not with the pretext of eliminating a cartoon or eliminating a color. And I take up this topic, although this has been almost overcome. This similar things happened with tobacco. First it was drawings, then brands, then colors, and in many countries now, in important countries, the brand is concealed or totally eliminated. And this is no longer seen. Now, those who have studied the topic have been referring to the sleeper's slope. This is something that began with tobacco, continued with alcohol, and the selling tobacco to people who are underage in the UK. So this is a slippery slope. In 2007, publicity was totally banned in Belgium, 1977, sorry. And this slope is not an exclusive thing, because while all this was happening in 1991, Australia already began with a series of measures against the consumption of tobacco, against tobacco use. I insist these are not states that go against one another. First, we have to strike a balance and to determine where the success lies in the measures taken by the state. And when is this a measure that is pointless? So expecting to reduce tobacco use to zero is impossible. It's like trying to prevent having obese people. The idea is to reduce this as much as possible. So we now see how this slope continues. In 2004, the World Health Organization, which has played a major role, is now taking a stance regarding food that is not nutritious. So now they have this new regulation on physical activity. European Union continued with a regulation on alcohol. In 2007, this slope went over to food and beverages. In Denmark, the food fat tax is introduced. In Hungary, against sugar and salt in food, and so on. All states have been taking measures, and as I said, this is not, it has extended to many more products. Now, which are the known results? Gerardo, in one of his slides, showed how Chile continued with increasing obesity rates despite these measures. So it is important to see what is really happening, what has been positive regarding this measure and what has had no effect at all. So after imposing labeling in Chile, Chile went from being the 8th country to the 2nd country in terms of obesity in the OECD countries. In the case of Australia, this is almost like a lost battle. And most of the countries have then decided to take a more drastic action.
In Australia, this drop of levels in 1991, as they included more stringent measures, went down. Up until 2012, when they make the generic packaging compulsory. Why this happened? Because they probably got to the limit of what they could do. That generic labeling hurt the trademark, but did not produce the result that was relevant to the steps taken. So we wonder, can we have health law coexisting with other laws or rights? Public interest is on top of private interest, according to most constitutions. But what is that public interest? Is health law the only public interest? We tend to see this as if the right to property were the right of the manufacturer of a product, and the right, the particular right of that manufacturer. I think both are public law rights. They go together. We cannot isolate them. We would be affecting the rights of a whole group of manufacturers if we say that there is another kind of interest on top of that. So health is always going to be the most important right. And this is something we have experienced after the pandemic. And this is not an abnormal consequence. This is human nature, regardless of the fact that there may be very serious effects and outcomes. But it's always going to be seen like that. But property is mostly seen as something private. So as Armando said, we need to find a right balance, and we need to find coincidences to see where coincidences lie. How can we work together with the private and public sectors to find the best solutions? Where does it all come from? Both sectors will need to change their approach a little. The general director of the WHO said a few years ago that it's not just big tobacco anymore. Public health must also contend with big food, big soda, big alcohol. And all of these industries fear regulation and protect themselves by using the same tactics. And this using the same tactics is what industry needs to change and have a new approach. The approach has been so far to go against, saying, I'll turn this around, I will lobby, and the lobby will save me. But we need to change that. We need to change that approach. Because the state will continue along the same lines. We live in a world that tries to be politically correct, and the industry will have to start to cooperate and become an ally and not an enemy. It has to be part of the problem or the solution. What is a solution? Eliminating the trademark is not a solution. Quite the contrary, people have a right to choose the brand or the trademark. And I think it all boils down to education, education, and more education. But education is costly. Nobody wants to pay for that cost. It's much easier to impose a tax than to educate. And education is what will technically lead us to the best outcome. What is the implication of education? It implies studying, producing statistics, informing, disseminating information, organizing campaigns. The Colombian Constitution has a very important article that says that individuals have their own health. They are compelled to do that, and we need to be aware of that. Industry needs to contribute through campaigns. It needs to improve products. If you know your product causes harm, you have to change that product. You have to have empathy, lobbying. You need to be more user-friendly and change the focus. So far, the spotlight is on industry. But industry needs to be part of the solution, and the state also needs to change. By state, I also mean NGOs, multilateral organizations, WHO. WHO must understand that companies exist and need to adjust, but they should not disappear. This is not an ideological struggle. There's a lot of ideology involved in this, affecting the companies. They need to understand that there are many more intelligent and effective measures. Positive measures are much better than negative measures. Why not motivate companies with fiscal credit to produce healthy foodstuffs? That's easy. But you add more taxes and you add more taxes, and that is an economic element. They need to understand that measures should have reliable results. If you eliminate the bird from the cereal box, that's not going to change things. That's not the solution. They need to understand that health cannot limit other rights. And finally, we need to understand that living needs certain things. We should not have labels where everything is dangerous. There is no design. They are all generic. They all look alike. That's misleading. That's tricky. If I eat one pizza a month, nothing is going to happen to me. And this is part of education. And we cannot get to this when this is so horrible. You see, someone suggested that we need to put a generic label on perfume because it may cause skin irritation. Living implies a right to every now and then eat whatever you like, though you know that it has extra sodium, but you can sin every now and then. Thank you. This is all. I'm open to questions now. Thank you, Luis. A very thorough presentation. Now, let me tell you that we have only 1 minute left to close the workshop. We got a question for Gerardo, and it comes from Mirta Hurtado. Thank you for your presentation, Gerardo. Some government measures limit certain foodstuffs, beverages, and so on. Apart from these trademark laws, how far do you think we will go? When will we have information about dangerous activities? what is the limit? Thank you for this question, Mirta. I think you deal with one of our main concerns, which should be part of what we need to work on. Over-regulation should not play against self-determination. This should be a clear objective. The way things are being presented, they apply different areas of law, and this could lead to a negative result, which is, as we add this type of regulation one on top of the other, we will end up basically in labels that will eliminate trademarks, as my colleagues have shown so clearly. We need to fight to preserve self-determination. Protecting public health does not exclude trademark law, and education is one mechanism that can provide certain results both for the population and for companies. Companies, alongside innovation and more social and entrepreneurial responsibility, could help consumers so that we don't get to extremes we are exposed to nowadays. This is what we need to avoid. Would my colleagues like to add something? No. Yes, well, we cannot continue because we are running out of time. Thank you all for your presentations. Take care, keep safe, and we'll meet again soon. Thank you. Thank you all, Gerardo, Armando, and Luis. Thank you. We'll meet soon. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.